What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks into what should be a routine morning show interview, only to find himself facing off against a host who seems determined to make him look bad on live television? What you're about to hear is the explosive exchange that had viewers picking sides and left everyone asking the same question. Who was really out of line here? Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me which side you think was right, because this one is going to divide people. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this plays out. It was supposed to be just another promotional appearance. Samuel L. Jackson had a new film coming out and his publicist had scheduled the usual rounds of morning show interviews. Good Morning America was first on the list, and Jackson arrived at the studio that morning in his typical professional manner, greeting the crew with his characteristic warmth and preparing for what should have been a straightforward conversation about his latest project. But from the moment he sat down across from Michael Strahan, something felt different. There was a tension in the air that Jackson couldn't quite place. Strahan's usual television smile seemed forced and his handshake lingered just a moment too long, like he was sizing up his guest. Samuel L. Jackson, welcome back to Good Morning America, Strahan began, his voice carrying that familiar television enthusiasm, but Jackson caught something else underneath it. A slight edge that made him straighten in his chair. Good to be here, Michael, Jackson replied, settling back and crossing his legs. He'd done thousands of these interviews over the years and he knew how to read a room. Something was already off. So, let's talk about your new film, Strahan continued, glancing down at his notes. But first, I think our viewers would be interested to know about some of the comments you made recently about the industry. You've been pretty vocal about certain issues. Jackson's eyebrows raised slightly. This wasn't the direction he'd expected the interview to take. His publicist had specifically outlined the talking points with the producers, all centered around the film, the cast, the director's vision. This felt like a departure from the agreed-upon script. Well, Michael, I've always been honest about my experiences in this business, Jackson said carefully. I think it's important to speak truthfully about the challenges we face as performers and as people. Right, Strahan nodded, but his expression suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with that response. But some people might say that when you're as successful as you are, when you've had the career you've had, maybe it's time to, focus on the positive instead of always bringing up the negative aspects. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jackson felt his jaw tighten slightly, but kept his composure. He'd faced tougher crowds than this, and he wasn't about to let a morning show host rattle him. I'm sorry, are you suggesting that speaking honestly about important issues is somehow inappropriate? Jackson's voice remained level, but anyone who knew him could hear the slight shift in tone, because I was under the impression that this was supposed to be about my film, not my personal philosophy on social commentary. Strahan leaned forward in his chair, his smile never wavering but his eyes growing sharper. Hey, I'm just saying what some people out there are thinking. You've built this reputation as someone who doesn't hold back, but sometimes viewers wonder if maybe you're being a little too, how should I put this, aggressive in your approach to certain topics. Aggressive, Jackson repeated the words slowly, and anyone watching could see his demeanor changing. The easygoing movie star persona was giving way to something more intense. That's an interesting choice of words, Michael. Would you use that same word to describe other actors who speak their minds? Or is that a special term you reserve for certain people? The live studio audience was beginning to sense the tension. What had started as a routine celebrity interview was quickly becoming something else entirely. Strahan, rather than backing down or steering the conversation back to safer territory, seemed to be doubling down on his confrontational approach. Look, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth or anything, Strahan said, holding up his hands in a gesture that was meant to appear conciliatory, but came across as condescending. I'm just wondering if you ever think about how your comments might come across to regular people. Everyday Americans who just want to be entertained when they go to the movies. Jackson's response came without hesitation, and his voice carried the kind of authority that had made him one of the most commanding presences in Hollywood. Michael, let me ask you something. Do you think the people watching this show right now are incapable of handling honest conversations about real issues? Do you think they're too simple to understand that an actor can both entertain them and have opinions about the world around them? The question caught Strahan off guard. He hadn't expected Jackson to turn the table so directly, and for a moment his television-ready composure slipped. That's not what I'm saying at all. Then what exactly are you saying? Jackson pressed, leaning forward now. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're suggesting I should keep my mouth shut about things that matter to me and just smile and wave and talk about how great everything is. Is that the kind of interview you want to conduct here? I just think Strahan began, but Jackson wasn't finished. No, let me finish, Jackson said, his voice rising just slightly but carrying tremendous weight. I've been doing this for over 30 years. I've worked with some of the greatest directors in the business. I've been part of films that have moved people, challenged people, entertained people. And in all that time I've never once apologized for having opinions or for speaking my mind. So if that makes me aggressive in your book, then I guess we have very different definitions of that word. The studio had grown quiet. The producers behind the cameras were frantically trying to figure out how to handle what was quickly becoming a live television disaster, but neither Jackson nor Strahan seemed willing to back down. Look, Sam, Strahan said, and the casual use of the shortened name was clearly intended to diminish Jackson's stature. I respect your career. I really do. But sometimes I think you forget that not everyone sees the world the way you do. Sometimes people just want to hear about the movie without all the extra commentary. Jackson's eyes narrowed. Sam, we're on Sam terms now. That's interesting. And let me get this straight. You think people are too fragile to handle a conversation that goes beyond surface-level promotion? You think your viewers are that shallow? I think my viewers appreciate honesty. Strahan shot back, and honestly, sometimes it feels like you're more interested in making points than in connecting with people. Making points. Jackson's voice carried a dangerous quiet. Now, Michael, every film I make, every role I take, every interview I give is about connecting with people. The difference is I don't treat people like they're children who can't handle complex thoughts. I give them credit for being intelligent human beings who can appreciate both entertainment and substance. The tension in the studio was now palpable. What had started as a celebrity interview had devolved into a philosophical battleground, with Jackson defending his right to be more than just a promotional tool and Strahan seemingly determined to put him in his place. The audience could sense that something significant was happening, but they had no idea how much worse it was about to get. Strahan, sensing he was losing control of the interview, decided to take a different approach. Instead of backing down, he leaned into the conflict, apparently believing he could somehow regain the upper hand by becoming even more confrontational. You know what, Samuel? Strahan said, emphasizing the full name now in an obvious attempt to sound more respectful after being called out. I've been doing television for a long time too, and I've interviewed a lot of celebrities. Most of them understand that there's a time and place for everything. When you come on a morning show, people are having their coffee, getting ready for work. They want something light, something positive. Jackson's response was swift and cutting. So now you're the authority on what people want? You've decided that the viewers of this show are incapable of engaging with anything more substantial than fluff pieces and weather reports. That's not what I said. That's exactly what you said, Jackson fired back. You just told me that people having their morning coffee can't handle a real conversation. You've essentially called your own audience shallow, but somehow I'm the problem for giving them credit for being more intelligent than that. Strahan's jaw tightened visibly. Look, I know you think you're making some kind of profound point here, but this is Good Morning America, not a philosophy class. People tune in for entertainment and information, not to be lectured. Lectured. Jackson's voice rose slightly and the studio audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Michael, having an opinion and expressing it thoughtfully isn't lecturing. It's called being a human being. But apparently in your world, celebrities are supposed to be nothing more than trained seals, clapping and barking on command when you want them to promote something. That's ridiculous and you know it. Strahan shot back, his own voice beginning to rise. I've had thousands of guests on this show and most of them managed to have a conversation without turning everything into some kind of political statement or social commentary. Jackson leaned back in his chair and anyone who knew his films could recognize the look that was crossing his face. It was the same expression he wore right before delivering some of his most memorable lines. That moment of calm before the storm. Political statement. Michael, when did talking about treating people with respect become political? When did suggesting that audiences are intelligent become controversial? You're the one who turned this interview in this direction. I came here to talk about my film, remember? And we can still do that, Strahan said. But his tone suggested he had no intention of letting this go. But first, I think we should address the elephant in the room. A lot of people feel like you've become too comfortable using your platform to push your personal agenda. My personal agenda, Jackson repeated, and his voice carried that unmistakable edge that had made him famous for playing characters who didn't back down from anyone. And what agenda would that be exactly? Strahan seemed to realize he'd stepped into dangerous territory, but instead of retreating, he pushed forward. I mean, you're constantly talking about inequality, about how the industry treats certain people differently, about social issues that some people think should be kept separate from entertainment. Some people think that, do they? Jackson's voice was getting quieter, which anyone familiar with his work knew was not a good sign. Michael, let me ask you something. When you wake up in the morning, do you get to choose whether or not you're black? The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. The studio audience went completely silent and even the camera operators seemed to freeze. That's not what this is about, Strahan said quickly. But Jackson wasn't finished. No, answer the question. Do you get to wake up and decide whether or not your race is going to factor into how people treat you that day? Because I sure don't. So, when you tell me to keep my personal agenda separate from my work, what you're really saying is that my experience as a black man in America should be something I hide when I'm promoting a movie. Strahan looked genuinely flustered now. Samuel, you're putting words in my mouth that I never said. Am I? Because it sounds to me like you think there are certain topics I should avoid discussing, certain aspects of my life and experience that make you uncomfortable. And the fact that you're calling basic human dignity and equal treatment a personal agenda tells me everything I need to know about where you stand. That's completely unfair, Strahan protested. I never said anything about race or dignity or any of that. I'm talking about keeping things appropriate for the audience in the time slot. Jackson laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. Appropriate for the audience, Michael. You just spent the last 10 minutes questioning my right to have opinions and suggesting that speaking honestly about my experiences is somehow aggressive or inappropriate. Now you want to pretend this conversation isn't about exactly what it's about. Look, I think we're getting off track here, Strahan said, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. Why don't we talk about your new film? I'm sure that's what people really want to hear about. Oh, now you want to talk about the film? Jackson's voice dripped with sarcasm. After spending all this time telling me how I should behave and what I should think and how I should present myself to your audience, that's convenient. Straw's professional facade was beginning to crack. I never told you how to behave or what to think. I simply suggested that maybe there are better forums for certain types of discussions. Certain types of discussions, Jackson repeated slowly. You mean discussions about real issues that affect real people? Discussions that might make some of your viewers think about something beyond their morning routine. Michael, do you hear yourself right now? I hear someone who's determined to make this interview about everything except the reason you're supposed to be here. Strahan fired back, his patience clearly wearing thin. Jackson stood up slightly in his chair and his voice carried the full weight of his decades in the business. The reason I'm here is because your producers invited me to come and talk about my work, but apparently what you really wanted was for me to come here and be a good little celebrity, smile pretty, say nothing of substance, and make sure I don't challenge anyone's preconceptions about anything. That's not true, and you know it. Then explain to me what just happened here, Jackson demanded. Explain to me why a conversation about my film turned into you questioning my right to have opinions and suggesting that I'm too aggressive for speaking my mind. Explain to me why you think it's appropriate to sit there and tell me how I should conduct myself as a public figure. Strahan looked directly into the camera as if appealing to the viewers at home. I think our audience can see what's happening here. I asked some reasonable questions and instead of having a normal conversation, we've gotten lectures and accusations. Jackson's eyes flashed dangerously. You just did it again. You just dismissed everything I said as lectures and accusations instead of addressing the actual points I raised. Michael, you've been condescending and disrespectful from the moment I sat down, and now you want to play victim because I called you on it. The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point. Production assistants were whispering frantically to each other, and the director was making urgent gestures from behind the cameras, but both men seemed locked in a battle of wills that neither was prepared to lose. I've been nothing but professional, Strahan insisted, but his voice betrayed his growing frustration. Professional? Jackson's laugh was bitter. Michael, you've questioned my integrity, dismissed my intelligence, and suggested that I should keep my mouth shut about issues that matter to me. If that's your definition of professional, then we have very different standards. What happened next would go down as one of the most shocking moments in morning television history. Strahan, apparently believing he could somehow salvage the situation by doubling down on his position, made a decision that would prove to be a massive miscalculation. You know what, Samuel? Strahan said, his voice taking on a tone that suggested he thought he was about to deliver some kind of devastating comeback. Maybe the problem isn't with my questions. Maybe the problem is that you've become so used to people walking on eggshells around you that you can't handle it when someone treats you like a regular guest instead of giving you special treatment. The words hit the studio like a thunderclap. The audience audibly gasped and even the crew members behind the cameras looked stunned. Jackson's face went completely still and for a moment the silence was deafening. Special treatment? Jackson repeated, his voice deadly quiet. Michael, did you just suggest that expecting basic respect and professionalism is asking for special treatment? Strahan seemed to realize he'd crossed a line, but instead of backing down, he pressed forward with what would prove to be career-damaging stubbornness. I'm just saying that every guest who comes on this show gets the same treatment. I ask tough questions, I challenge people. That's what good interviewers do, tough questions. Jackson's voice was rising now and his famous intensity was on full display. Michael, you haven't asked me a single question about my craft, my preparation, my process, or anything related to why I'm supposedly here. Instead, you've spent this entire time trying to put me in my place and suggesting that I should be grateful for the opportunity to sit here and be insulted on live television. That's not what happened, and you know it. Strahan shot back, but his voice lacked conviction now. Jackson stood up from his chair, and the movement was so sudden and decisive that several audience members actually leaned back in their seats. Michael, let me tell you what happened here. You decided before I even sat down that you were going to try to embarrass me on your show. You thought you could score some points by putting the uppity actor in his place and you miscalculated badly. Sit down, Samuel. We're not finished here, Strahan said, trying to reassert some authority. But his words only made things worse. Jackson's response was delivered with the kind of controlled fury that had made him a legend. Oh, we're finished. All right, but let me make something crystal clear before I walk out of here. You don't get to tell me to sit down. You don't get to dismiss my concerns as lectures, and you certainly don't get to suggest that expecting to be treated with basic human dignity is asking for special treatment. You're overreacting, Strahan said, but his voice was getting smaller. Overreacting. Jackson's laugh was sharp and humorless. Michael, you just spent 20 minutes trying to humiliate a guest on live television, and when he refused to take it quietly, you accused him of overreacting. Do you understand how that sounds? Strahan looked around the studio as if seeking support, but found none. The crew was staring at him with expressions ranging from shock to disappointment, and the audience was completely silent, hanging on every word of this unprecedented confrontation. Look, maybe we both got a little heated, Strahan said, clearly trying to find some kind of middle ground, but Jackson wasn't interested in compromise. No, Michael, you got heated. I got disrespected. There's a difference. You came into this interview with an agenda, and when I didn't play along with your little game, you decided to get nasty. Well, congratulations. You got exactly what you wanted. Jackson began unhooking his microphone, and the finality of the gesture sent panic through the production team. Samuel, wait, Strahan said, suddenly realizing the magnitude of what was happening. We can work this out. Work what out? Jackson turned back to face him, and his expression was one of complete disgust. You've shown me exactly who you are, Michael. You've shown everyone watching exactly who you are. There's nothing to work out. Don't do this. Strahan pleaded, his television persona completely abandoned now. Don't walk out on live television. Jackson paused in removing his microphone and looked directly at Strahan with an expression that could have melted steel. You know what the most pathetic part of this whole thing is? You actually think you're the victim here. You think that being called out for your behavior makes you the wronged party in this situation? I never meant for any of this to happen, Strahan said weakly. Yes, you did, Jackson replied with absolute certainty. You meant for exactly this to happen. You just thought it would go differently. You thought I would sit here and take whatever you wanted to dish out, smile for the camera, and thank you for the privilege. Well, I've got news for you, Michael. Those days are over. Jackson finished removing his microphone and set it down on the table with deliberate care. To everyone watching at home, I apologize that your morning show got turned into this circus, but sometimes you have to take a stand. Even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's inconvenient, especially when it's inconvenient. Samuel, please. Strahan tried one last time, but Jackson was already walking away. No, Michael, you've said enough. We both have. Jackson stopped at the edge of the set and turned back one final time. And just so we're clear, this isn't about being difficult or demanding special treatment. This is about refusing to be disrespected by someone who thinks his platform gives him the right to talk down to his guests. The studio erupted in confused murmurs as Jackson walked off the set, leaving Strahan sitting alone at the interview table, looking completely shell-shocked. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of what would become one of the most talked-about incidents in morning television history. We'll be right back, Strahan said weakly to the camera, but his voice was barely audible over the chaos that had erupted in the studio. As Jackson disappeared behind the scenes, the full weight of what had just happened began to settle over everyone present. This wasn't just a celebrity having a bad interview. This was a complete breakdown of professional standards, and everyone in that studio knew they had just witnessed something that would be talked about for years to come. The irony wasn't lost on anyone paying attention. Strahan had started the interview trying to put Jackson in his place, suggesting that the actor was too aggressive and outspoken for mainstream audiences, but in the end, it was Strahan himself who had come across as unprofessional, disrespectful, and completely out of his depth when faced with someone who refused to be intimidated. Jackson's final words echoed in the silent studio, a reminder that sometimes standing up for yourself means walking away from situations where you're not being treated with the respect you deserve. And as the production team scrambled to figure out how to fill the remaining time in the show, one thing was perfectly clear. Samuel L. Jackson had just reminded everyone watching why he's considered one of the most formidable presences in entertainment, both on-screen and off. So there you have it. The complete breakdown of one of the most explosive morning show interviews ever recorded. What do you think? Was Samuel L. Jackson right to walk out, or should he have handled things differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button for more incredible stories like this one. And let me know what other celebrity confrontations you'd like to hear about. Because if this taught us anything, it's that sometimes the most revealing moments happen when the cameras are rolling and nobody's following the script.